President Donald J. Trump.
Is that the first time Burt Jones' cut has ever been played over Flavor in Your Ear? Welcome back to the Mark Arum Show, 1037. Hey, how about a big congratulations to Janie in Demarest. She won a grand for gas. Congratulations, Jamie. A grand for gas here on 95.5 WSB. She's a winner. Who are the winners and losers of last night's primary voting? Joining us live in studio after a late night on television, political analyst Stephen Lawson. Did you even get my text messages last night? Or you got them and ignored them? What's the protocol there on TV set?
They were in and out. There were a lot of people texting me. I had to have my phone silenced, but you were the first person I texted this morning, Mark. So.
I appreciate that. All right, let's. I don't know where you want to start. Winners, losers. You want to start with the governor's race? How do you want to break this down?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we've got to start in the governor's race. Obviously, Mark, we've talked about it on your show how monumental of a matchup this was on the Republican side. Really, I think for a number of months we knew that it was going to be a two-horse race. But I think really last night what we saw, I think, is an overperformance by Burt Jones. I think he is a clear winner coming out of last night. A lot of the public polling heading into the race had Rick Jackson out in front. But for Burt Jones to win by 6 points, I think he's got a ton of momentum heading into the runoff. Look, either one of these candidates can win and emerge, but I think Burt Jones with the Trump endorsement and really I think overperforming, I think gives him a lot of momentum heading into the runoff.
Let me ask you this question because it just occurred to me. So in third place, Brad Raffensperger, Secretary of State, 15%. Chris Carr, who at one point before Rick Jackson got in the race, probably was lining up in runoff territory. He got 12%. Might we see an endorsement by Brad or Chris heading up to this runoff?
Yeah. A couple interesting dynamics. I think runoffs are all about what voters show up and what the electorate looks like. It's going to be a smaller, condensed universe of voters, higher propensity voters that are more likely to turn out. Think your base Republican voters. That's why I think the advantage as of now is probably with Burt Jones. But I think one of the big question marks is where do those Chris Carr and Brad Raffensperger voters go? Do they support Rick Jackson? I think that there's a chance that Chris Carr comes out and supports Rick Jackson. I think Brad Raffensperger is probably likely to stay on the sidelines. But I think the bigger question is, do those folks show up in a runoff? If they were so turned off by both Jones and Jackson in the general and the primary, do they come back out and vote? That's a storyline I think is going to be really interesting.
You raise an interesting question that just occurred to me. So this is going to be the high profile runoff, right? We're going to get to the Senate runoff in a sec. But when it comes to turnout, are Democrats going to show up to the polls at all? Or is this going to be 98% Republicans turning out for these runoffs?
Yeah, really good question. I think you're going to see a lot more Republicans show up in a runoff scenario. We're going to get to the Democrat race for governor in a second. But because of that dynamic, I think you're going to see a depressed turnout on the D side, and there's going to be more Republicans that turn out to vote because of these high-profile runoffs at the top of the ticket.
But I think depressed is too polite a word. I don't think that. So Keisha Lance Bottoms, we're going to get to her race in a second. She does not have a runoff. John Ossoff ran unopposed. Those are the two big ticket. Are Democrats do they have any reason to get off the couch?
Yeah, there's a couple down ballot races that they do have runoffs in terms of the lieutenant governor's race and I believe a couple others. But yeah, not a lot left on the table for Democrats to go decide between.
Keisha, the polls were right. I was dubious from day one. I'm like, yeah, she's going to get some votes, but there's going to be a runoff. Nada. I mean, 56, 57% of the vote runaway. To me, she's a winner because she doesn't have to spend any money now in a runoff.
She's another big winner from last night, former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. Mark, we've talked about it for the last few weeks. Was there a window for her to sneak over the finish line? I argued that I saw the writing on the wall a little bit. I think that there was, and clearly she not only hit it, but she blew through it.
Yeah.
And she performed extremely well for her to win without a runoff. I think it's going to give her a number of advantages. The first being that she's immediately going to start raising money for a general election while Burt Jones and Rick Jackson have to go through another 4 weeks. That's a big head start, and it'll be very important for her. It also is going to let her to sit back and define both of those candidates on her own terms for a month. I think those are two big advantages. But I think the flip side is for Republicans, I think she is still extremely vulnerable when we get down to it in November because of her record as mayor of Atlanta, a number of controversies. I think those will be raised in a very prominent manner. And what do those swing and independent voters feel about her tenure as mayor?
With the sizable win here, first off, I was kind of shocked that Jason Estevez came in second and not Michael Thurman. I thought it would be flip-flop there. I think Estevez does have a bright future in the Democratic Party. This just wasn't his opportunity, and the wins were behind the sails of Keisha Lance Bottom for sure. But now that she is firmly the Democratic nominee, are we going to see multiple Obamas in Georgia, campaigning for her? Are the Democrats going to send some of their big hitters down here to try to elevate her campaign?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're going to see all the stars coming to Georgia ahead of November. We've gotten used to this in Georgia, right? Since basically 2018, 2020, we have gotten used to being a very prominent battleground state that not only will decide the fate of policy in Georgia, but potentially nationally with this U.S. Senate race. So there's going to be lots of fireworks, lots of big names, lots of headliners. We've got 2028 presidential primaries coming up. I think that's going to play a part. So lots going on in the months ahead.
I was watching the cable news coverage yesterday. I was listening to Shelley and watching the cable news flipping between CNN, Fox News, and not once, not twice, but thrice on different networks. I heard talk about the 2028 presidential race. I heard Brian Kemp's name being mentioned, and I heard John Ossoff's name being mentioned, which to me, I didn't think there was a runway there. There was a calculus there for Ossoff. But is that a legitimate possibility that Ossoff and or Kemp could maybe float the idea of a presidential run in 2028?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're going to see a lot of names being tossed out there. I think Raphael Warnock is another name that people probably aren't talking about that could be a very formidable presidential candidate in a Democrat primary. He's shown the ability to raise a lot of money. So I think you're going to see a lot of names tossed about. And I think that will be, as we get closer to November, a storyline and a backdrop to the 2026 election.
Political analyst Stephen Lawson joining us live in studio on the Mark Arum Show. All right, let's get to the Senate race. We have a runoff there. Buddy Carter, the odd man out at 25%. He gave his concession speech, said he called both Mike Collins and Derek Dooley. I wasn't sure which way this was going to go. As far as I knew Collins would be the top vote getter. I knew there'd be a runoff. I didn't know who would be the second place finisher.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a big win for Mike Collins. I mean, obviously you see him at close to 41%, and Derek Dooley coming into that second spot. I think it's also a win for Derek Dooley to sneak into that second spot. We've talked about the power of Brian Kemp's endorsement. Clearly, that is what pushed Derek Dooley across the finish line in his second place. It's going to be really interesting. If you look at the vote breakdown, Buddy Carter dominated in his congressional district, in coastal Georgia. I think the biggest question in that runoff is, where did those voters go? The conventional wisdom would be that they would skew more towards Mike Collins, but will that play out? And then what does Brian Kemp and Donald Trump do? We think that Brian Kemp will double down on his endorsement for Derek Dooley, continue to barnstorm the state as he has over the past few months. What does Donald Trump do in response? And does this set up another Brian Kemp-Donald Trump clash over candidates in Georgia? I think that's a really interesting storyline to watch.
Yeah, the ballot's going to say Collins-Dooley, but it might as well be Trump-Kemp because, where are the voters going to go? Are they going to – and listen, gosh, we saw what happened in Kentucky. I mean, President Trump, this is still his party. He is just ticking off everyone on his enemies list, whether it's Massey or Cassidy. That still weighs a lot. But, the Georgia voters, this is a special place. Governor Kemp, wildly popular. Will that endorsement overcome the Trump endorsement?
Yeah, it's going to be a wild showdown. Mark, we talked about the president right now is very emboldened, I believe, on his endorsements. He is looking to play kingmaker. You saw it most recently with Kim Paxton in Texas. You saw it last night with Massey going down. You've seen it with Bill Cassidy going down in Indiana, the redistricting fights. We've talked about that a lot. I am very curious to see if he wades in for Mike Collins here. But I think if he doesn't, it's going to be a very close runoff. But I think if he does endorse Mike Collins, I think Mike Collins is going to be your winner here.
A lot of the money's going to the governor's race. Is there going to be money left over for the Senate race?
It's going to be hard. I think that's one advantage potentially Derek Dooley has in this runoff is that I think Brian Kemp will be able to help him raise some money in a short sprint. But the question is how much is he going to be able to raise from donors, and is it enough? And again, where did those Buddy Carter voters go? That is what I am looking at on this screen because the coastal Georgia represents a big portion of voters in the runoff.
Will Mr. Carter endorse?
I think he's going to stay put. I think he's probably going to stay on the sidelines, but I think that could change depending on what Donald Trump does.
All right, political analyst Stephen Lawson. We paid overtime for you, so you're going to stick around for one more segment. I don't know how we fit this in the budget.